Hey everybody, welcome to Rainer Radio. I am your host Joshua Rainer. Today my guest is Clark Engelbert, Metals Bra on the socials. Clark, how's it going?
Good, Josh. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah,
Looking
man.
forward to it today.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I you are your handle's Metals Bra, and I kind of know you as the minerals guy.
Yeah, yeah.
And I feel like it's something that a lot of people in the health world know is important to some extent, but not a lot of people know much about. So if you wouldn't mind kind of giving people a little bit of a basics of what it is that you focus on.
Yeah, so basically I'm a mineral balancing practitioner. Um, and that's it sort of encompasses both minerals and metals as we'll sort of get into here, but the idea with mineral balancing more broadly is that we're trying to balance all of the minerals in what we call the mineral system or ionome all at once at sort of the tissue level. And you know, through that process, we have to do diagnostics for people. We use a hair tissue mineral analysis as part of that sort of mineral balancing paradigm. But the idea is that minerals and metals actually exist in this broader mineral system, or what is called in the literature the ionome. And so, what we're trying to do in mineral balancing is account for all of the different elements, essential and non-essential, and especially the essential ones, balance them all at the same time through our knowledge of basically nutrient and mineral interactions. And then that has a very sort of very powerful effect on heavy metals because metals and minerals are antagonistic in the body actually. So we can basically use mineral balancing as like a modality for heavy metal detoxification.
So, is there a certain qualifier that differentiates between what is considered a mineral and a heavy metal?
There is, yeah, 100%. I would say the main delineating factor is essential versus non-essential. Um,
Okay.
there is a little gray area in there because there are mineral elements that are they're still working out whether or not they're essential or if they're necessary for some enzymatic process. A lot of them, like the ultra trace elements, like maybe vanadium or rubidium or silica, there's the thought that those elements are essential, but they just haven't identified any sort of specific enzyme that those elements are used for or some specific process. But that's the main delineating factor is essential versus non-essential. A little gray area in there, but the non-essential metals, the heavy metals, are the ones that we generally think of as toxic.
Okay. And are everyone knows about electrolytes. Are electrolytes just like a subcategory of minerals?
Yes, exactly. So like the bigger bulk elements, they're called the bulk elements, the electrolytes. It's sort of like, yeah, those elements are required in much higher quantities in the body versus the trace elements. So there is ways to sort of subdivide all of the essential elements. You have the bigger ones, calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium, and then the trace elements like iron, zinc, copper, manganese, and so on.
Yeah, there's the way that being in whatever you want to call the health world for a very long time, and I've heard many different people talk about health in different ways, supplements, nutrition,
Mm-hmm.
and there are some of those minerals or metals that people will talk about or reference having a toxicity of them.
Mm,
And that usually kind of means like too much of it, right?
exactly.
But it's like I've never heard of toxicity being used to apply to sodium, potassium, calcium, or magnesium.
Right.
And so I don't know if those are the ones that your body just regulates very easily or just pisses out excess
Mm-hmm.
versus what you just referred to as the trace
Mm-hmm.
minerals, where everyone might recognize that zinc is important
Right.
and iron is important and copper is important, but then I hear about there being too much of that. So where does the kind of line fall between the ones that you can have too much of?
Yeah, 100%. So this is definitely gets more into the nuance and is it's a really good question because even with the essential elements, you can get too much of an essential element at any one time. And that sort of is where we're leading into you can end up like iron toxic. As an example, iron's really important for a lot of different functions, oxygenation of the blood, but you can get too much of it. Same way that like calcium is extremely important or sodium and potassium. or magnesium, they're all really, really important, but you can go beyond a certain threshold on the intake side of things and you can get too much. So I think the difference between like a toxic element and the essential element is toxic, like cadmium or some other metal that we would think of as toxic, not any amount is toxic. With the essential elements, there's a sort of continuum or range that you want to get on intake. And if you go beyond that continuum threshold for intake, you can end up toxic in that element. What's also kind of interesting about this is that if you end up with an improper form of one of these elements, like chromium or manganese, as an example, I think the most famous example of this is with Aaron Brockovich, the movie, where the town of Hinckley, California, was poisoned by this form of chromium, which was not nutritionally essential, hexavalent chromium. So there's different forms of the essential elements that you can get that are toxic and sort of function like toxic metals in some ways, in that any amount of hexavalent chromium is toxic to human beings.
Okay, perfect. Because I was just about to ask you about the forms.
Yeah.
It seems like like for instance, when you buy a magnesium supplement, which is one of the most popular supplements, it seems, there's all this conversation about which form. There's glycinate and citrate and carbonate and all these different forms. And so, without I'm trying to think of how the general population or even the health enthusiasts who might be listening to this, without everyone having to become a chemist, right, what's kind of like the easiest steps to figure out, what are the better forms of these various supplements?
The way that I think about this, to sort of boil it down, is that minerals that are bound to amino acids tend to be absorbed a little more efficiently. So any sort of chelated form of a mineral will tend to be absorbed a little better. Where the magnesium sort of argument comes in and everyone's taking like threonate or glycinate or these different forms, and they are sort of like bound to different amino acids, right? So you can sort of subdivide a chelated form of a mineral based on like the amino acid that it's bound to. That's pretty, at least sort of known when it comes to like zinc. Certain forms of zinc are absorbed a little better based on the amino acid that it's bound to. But in general, I think the easiest way to think about that is that chelated versus non-chelated. And chelated forms of minerals will be absorbed a little better than the non-chelated ones.
So if people are, I would think that most nutrients across the board are most ideally consumed from food and not from supplements, because, they exist in matrix and with balance of other nutrients.
True.
But then, people talk about how because our soil is depleted, the foods don't have the right minerals that they used to have. What are some of like the best actionable steps for people to take to kind of get their minerals figured out?
Number one, I think doing diagnostics is very good. And I think most of the people, like I recognize you and know you from being in the peat space, mostly. In the peat space, there's a lot of diagnostics that you guys do, it seems like, to track things. That I think is good. That's sort of the baseline, right? And blood test, you can get into this argument of blood testing versus urine testing versus hair testing, especially for toxic elements. But as a sort of general baseline, what I would focus on first is improving nutrient density in the diet. And I think by virtue of that, you have to focus on like caloric sufficiency and getting enough calories. Sort of like another, I think, principle in the peat space that I tend to like agree with quite a bit. A lot of people are running caloric deficits chronically for years now. And that's a big problem in the modern environment because we know that the soils are so depleted of nutrients compared to 100 years ago. So I would start as a baseline just getting enough calories, but then also getting those calories from foods that are really nutrient dense. That's the baseline. And I think there is a good argument for getting minerals from food because they come sort of balanced with other elements. The risk of toxicity from those elements goes down. But I think the nutrient density in the soils nowadays is such that supplements, if you use them strategically, and you use them sort of based on diagnostics, you can use them to get much bigger results. And that's kind of what we're doing with mineral balancing.
What have you seen? Because yes, like it's great to get the diagnostics, to get the tests, and first off, not a lot of people can't do that, or they're just not going to do it, or
Right.
maybe
100%.
they're going to they're going to build up to that point. But what have you seen on just like a greater population-wide scale of which minerals are most people deficient in, and which minerals are people have toxic levels of?
I'd say magnesium is probably the most sort of the mineral that is most deficient in most people, and that's really, I think, magnesium is found in a lot of the green vegetables in foods. Some other good sources as well, almonds and others as well. But magnesium is probably number one in terms of deficiency. Number two, I would say either potassium or zinc. A lot of people have a very hard time getting enough potassium. Even meeting the RDAs is really difficult for a lot of people for potassium. But then also zinc. A lot of what goes on, I think, with these more overt deficiency states is that the toxic metals, because they're so ubiquitous in the environment now, they have a really powerful antagonistic effect on these essential elements. So even, having intake sufficiency of these elements might not be enough to antagonize metals that are either blocking absorption or preventing like assimilation of some of these elements. But those three, I would say, magnesium, potassium, and zinc, are the biggest in terms of deficiencies. When it comes to excesses, I don't know if I necessarily see excesses in terms of calcium intake, but calcification is a problem that I see pretty often in a lot of my clients. To me, that's not necessarily an issue of too much calcium intake. Could be actually lower calcium intake and problems with handling of calcium, which there's a pretty broad network of hormones and other things that affect calcium partitioning and utilization. But calcium is one of those ones. Calcification and iron toxicity is another big issue that is pretty legitimate. When it comes to iron toxicity, I think it's really interesting to understand iron in this broader context of the ionome or the mineral system. And it's sort of the metals that impact iron. Like aluminum, as one example, can stimulate transferrin receptors. That can cause more iron accumulation intracellularly. So especially in the modern day, in this modern context that we're in, a lot of people call what we're in now the aluminum age. Aluminum is so ubiquitous in the environment. It's extremely ubiquitous. It's the most toxic or the most ubiquitous of all the toxic metals. I tend to think of like iron toxicity as, yes, it's an issue of maybe excessive intake because of fortification, like in the 40s, and that's gone on for a while. But I think of that as more of a toxic metal problem than anything else.
Okay, perfect. So I wanted to get to kind of both of what you touched on. So for calcium first, at least like in the peat sphere, usually what gets brought up in regards to calcium is vitamin K2
Yes.
and D3 to get the calcium in the right tissue parts of your body, right? So your tissue is not calcified and it takes the calcium into the bones. And that's kind of where I'm trying to connect these things from my familiarity with things that people in the peat sphere talk about. And so for me, like, maybe it's oversimplified, but that's the way I kind of make sense of it. If your body has too much calcification of the tissue, then you might need more vitamin K and vitamin D3. And then while on the flip side, if you are supplementing vitamin D3 and vitamin K2 and you're not getting enough calcium, you might also run into a problem.
True.
And then I'm aware of the fact that calcium and magnesium compete. Is that correct?
They do, yeah.
Okay. So could it be that if all this tissue is calcified, that is then depleting magnesium in the body? Is that am I right there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, calcium and magnesium are antagonistic. Calcium and potassium are antagonistic. Calcium and iron are antagonistic. Calcium and zinc are antagonistic as well. So what's most interesting to me is there is kind of like this broad awareness of like there are mineral interactions, like zinc and copper interact with each other, or calcium and magnesium interact with each other. But a lot of these elements are the interactions are multifactorial. It's not just like a one-dimensional sort of thing where calcium only interacts with like magnesium, or calcium only interacts with like phosphorus as another sort of ratio that we can sort of bring into this. But if you end up with calcification or calcium in the wrong places, that can absolutely affect magnesium status. What's also interesting about that, I think, in relationship to like Ray Peat's work, is that emphasis on thyroid hormone. And where you are calcified, calcium desensitizes the cells to thyroid hormone. So if you end up with calcification, that's going to block T4 from getting into the peripheral tissues, especially the liver, where it's then converted into T3 through, deiodination. And you're going to have, you might not have overt or clinically diagnosable hypothyroidism, but you'll have a sort of subclinical imbalance where, where T3 might actually be low in that situation, maybe not TSH, but there's a relationship between calcium and potassium there, where calcium desensitizes the cells to thyroid hormone, potassium sensitizes the cells to thyroid hormone. So if there's an imbalance in that ratio and there's calcification, you can block thyroid hormone from getting into the liver at the rate at which it should, and you can end up with thyroid imbalance.
Okay, so it's funny because like every layer that you go, it's like it just goes deeper and deeper.
It does.
And it's like unless I don't know like what normal people do, that they don't dedicate their lives to this stuff, because it's like, even as someone who like, I'm not a scientist of any kind, I'm just an enthusiast, and I've just been trying to learn as much as I can about this stuff for a long time. It just feels like you have to know, you have to be aware of so much. Because, okay, so if calcified tissue are going to be desensitized to thyroid, but you need calcium to lower parathyroid hormone, which counters your thyroid. It's like, okay, so it's very important to have calcium, but the calcium has to be in the right place.
Yes.
And I would assume that people who have a lot of calcified tissue might not have a lot of calcium in their diet. So there's, whatever, it's like whatever's happening in their body, it's like you can't just kind of know the surface thing that like, okay, calcium bad, no, calcium good for, okay, wait,
Right.
it's a little bit more involved than that.
Yeah, 100%. And I think where things get really interesting and maybe even more complicated, a little mind numbing, is that the heavy metals, aluminum, lead, and cadmium, all compete with and displace calcium at the level of the bone. So if you end up with exposure to those elements, which we are all exposed now, and like lead as an example, 95% of the body burden of lead ends up in the bone tissue. Lead and cadmium and aluminum displace calcium from bone, sending it into the blood and the soft tissues. So you could end up with calcification as a result of those interactions at the level of bone. That to me, when I run hair tests and I see calcification, I almost always see co-occurring lead or aluminum toxicity. Sometimes cadmium, that's a little less common in terms of exposure, but those two imbalances go together, and there's all these feedback mechanisms in the kidneys, at the level of the gut, at the level of the bone, that also, all of your hormones are really important for calcium partitioning, I guess we could call it. And like with cadmium as an example, cadmium can have an effect on this calcification process locally or directly at the bone level, but cadmium inhibits conversion of the inactive form of vitamin D to the active form of vitamin D in the kidneys. So then if that's going on, you're going to have problems with calcium absorption, right? And so, yeah, these interactions, it's like, it gets a bit mind-numbing when you really delve into them.
Yeah, it seems like you kind of have to have some general idea of what your individual problem is, and then
100%.
kind of like aggressively
100%.
tackle it. So let's say someone were to have lead or cadmium in their bones. if they were to, let's say, drink a bunch of milk,
Hmm.
and let's say it's raw milk, so it has like lactoferrin in it,
Right.
and then they were to supplement vitamin D3 and K2,
Mm.
would then the calcium and the lactoferrin and the fat soluble vitamins help then have put that calcium back into the bones and outcompete the heavy metals in there?
It would. Yeah, absolutely. In theory, it would. I think with mineral balancing, we can kind of accelerate that process a bit. Um, the balancing, especially the major electrolyte elements, has a really powerful effect on hormones. And hormones, are really important for mineral retention, mineral utilization. The theory with mineral balancing is that we can upregulate mineral absorption and utilization by the balancing of these first four elements, the electrolytes, the calcium, the magnesium, sodium, and potassium. So you can kind of accelerate that absorption and utilization process through mineral balancing, which would then, in theory, drive out the metals even more quickly. But yes, you could actually, if you do that, take more D3, K2, drink a ton of milk, that would definitely be beneficial. But, at the same time, we are trying to, in some ways, not just focus on like one element. Raw dairy and dairy in general is extremely important in the modern world because of its calcium content, but we do want to sort of balance that. Like calcium and zinc are antagonistic to each other. So I think red meat, eggs, cheese has some zinc in it. Those foods are also important to sort of balance that at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, again, it's like every time it's like, okay, but this one and this one and this one
Yeah.
and this one.
Yeah.
And you know, another thing is that, especially like one of the reasons why a lot of people who criticize followers of Pete will talk about all the supplements that everyone's taking.
Right.
But, when your metabolic rate increases, your need for all these nutrients goes up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, kind of like the classic is, you need your liver and oysters. You need your liver and oysters to get in your mineral, to get in your zinc and your copper, and you're getting vitamin A in there. Um, and so that's something that, because a lot of people right now are trying to push their metabolic rate really high. What you're seeing with people experimenting with honey diet and these sugar diets,
Right.
where they okay, maybe so they're eating a lot of fruit, and you're going to have some minerals present in those fruits. You could be getting a lot of potassium,
Right.
especially if you're drinking a lot of orange juice. Um, and what I'm kind of concerned about is people are going to be burning through some of
Right.
these essential minerals. And so if someone were to be in a state where their metabolic rate is increased significantly,
Mm.
and they're eating a diet like this, what would you expect some of the most prevalent mineral deficiencies that would arise?
I think primarily the sedative elements, calcium, magnesium, and zinc, are some of the first to go or be antagonized through activation of the stress response or speeding up the metabolic rate. Those
Okay.
three, it's sort of interesting. There's a lot of like similarities between this mineral balancing paradigm and in the peat space as well. Like us, like what we do in terms of measuring the metabolic rate is really, really important. And we can kind of do that by looking at the balance of like sodium and potassium versus calcium and magnesium. And the way that we think about that in mineral balancing is that sodium and potassium are sort of like the gas on one's metabolism. Calcium and magnesium are like the brakes. And so it's interesting in the peat space where everyone's trying to speed up their metabolic rate. That works for people that are sort of starting out at baseline as slower metabolizers or slow oxidizers because it's sort of having a balancing effect. But if you do have people that start out with a sort of faster metabolism and they're trying to speed up even more from that point, you could, yeah, absolutely, in theory, burn through a lot of these essential elements. But those three, I think, calcium, magnesium, and zinc, copper potentially as well. Um, yeah.
I feel like copper in the last handful of years has gotten a lot more popular, something that's been talked about. I
Mm-hmm.
never really got too into his stuff, but I did listen to some like Morley Robbins
Mm-hmm.
podcasts. And but again, copper is another one where I've also heard that some people have copper toxicity.
Right.
Um, but Yeah, I've been reading more about copper, especially recently as I've been trying to crank my metabolism and kind of see what happens with this experiment.
Mm,
And I have a feeling that if people are eating a lot of these, if they're doing a really heavy fruit diet,
mm,
that there's a good chance that they might be specifically low on copper. Does
mm.
that sound right at all?
Where I see folks that have low copper sort of at baseline is when their metabolic rate tends to be faster.
Okay.
Um, Copper has a really powerful effect, obviously, on iron utilization, and that's kind of what Morley's entire career and ideas are sort of based around. But copper also has a really powerful effect on calcium and calcium utilization. And so, what I see with people that require copper and do well on higher copper diets is they tend to be faster metabolizers at rest or at baseline. And we can use copper as a calcium synergist to sort of balance that because of calcium and magnesium's antagonistic effects on sodium and potassium. So we actually use copper a little more liberally with people that are fast metabolizers at baseline because of that powerful effect or synergy that occurs between copper and calcium. So if someone starts out with like low calcium and magnesium, copper is the primary element that we're going to use to synergize calcium, especially to go higher in the tissues. Yes, you need more calcium and magnesium when you have low calcium and magnesium, but we can actually speed up that absorption and utilization process by taking into account these synergies.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that I um, became aware of myself because, I'm always because I don't really I consider myself a bro scientist, right? So everything that I learn,
Same,
yeah,
same.
it's I'll read stuff online.
Mhm.
I don't usually get too deep into studies, but
Mhm.
I kind of more like I'm kind of following the discourse and I'm listening to podcasts and watching videos and I'll kind of get obsessed with one thing and
Right,
but then I always have to apply it to myself, right? That's how I make sense
100%.
of it. I got to get my hands on it. I got to play with it.
Mhm.
And so on my current diet, which is this kind of sugar diet thing, where I'm mostly eating carbohydrates and mostly from sugary foods and fruit,
Mhm.
um, my cravings for shellfish has gone like through the roof.
Interesting.
Um, and because I'm trying to keep my fat down, because
Mm.
I'm trying to get as lean a protein as possible,
Mhm.
most of my protein sources are shrimp,
Mm.
some scallops. I love octopus.
Mm.
Um, I know shrimp's really high in copper, and
Right.
shellfish seems to be generally high in copper. I
Mm.
noticed that specifically my cravings for these foods went up a lot, and so
Interesting.
that's what like suddenly kind of boosted my interest in copper specifically
Mm.
because it seems like all of a sudden my body's like
We need
really
more of
wanting all
it.
these copper foods.
Do you crave liver?
Um, yeah, somewhat.
Mm.
Like,
Mm.
I don't. I ate so much liver during my like carnivore primal
Mhm.
years
Okay,
that
so you went through that phase too.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
of course. And one, it's like I just don't like bothering too much with making it.
Mm.
And so even when I did eat liver, I just ate it raw because it was just easiest.
Oh shit, you're savage, bro. Jeez.
Uh, well, well, I mean, at this point, it's like every soccer mom eats raw liver now. It's like it's
True.
totally normie code at this
10 years
point.
ago, though, that was
No, no,
like you
no.
were on the
Yeah,
cutting
10 years
edge.
ago, but now, I mean, I remember the first time I ate liver
Mm.
was probably 2013, and I got some like calf liver, veal liver or something, and I was trying to cook it, and I just like could, and I just like said, screw it, I'm just gonna eat it raw.
Yeah.
Um, but there's this one restaurant uh, that that they have a really good like chicken liver mousse dish, and every
Mm.
time I go there, I order it, and it's like it tastes like so sweet, and it's delicious.
Interesting. It sounds pretty good.
Yeah, but like I wouldn't say that like I'm not craving liver. I just
Mm.
because it's like one of those foods that you either like you eat or you don't, or it's kind of the trouble to deal with it, or like yeah, you have to go source it well. Um, I wouldn't say that I've thought about how much I've been craving it, but
Mm.
maybe I'm definitely craving it more than I remember craving it over the last few years.
Interesting.
Um, and so maybe so I became very aware of um, a few years ago. I just talked about this on my last episode,
Mhm.
but a few years ago I did like a pretty severe. Like I lost like 25 pounds, and I pretty much just like cut all the fat out of my diet.
Interesting.
I was eating like a high protein, high
Mhm.
carb diet, which was I was getting my protein from like non-fat Greek yogurt and lots
Mhm.
of shrimp,
Mhm.
and I was getting my carbs from fruit and juice and sugar and white rice and Coca Cola.
Mhm.
And I was doing it at the same time as some of my other PD friends.
Mhm.
And we kind of all came to the conclusion at the same time that we gave ourselves like a cholesterol and vitamin A deficiency
Oh, interesting.
because we cut out all the fatty foods.
Right.
But funny enough, I was eating a lot of shrimp, which is high in cholesterol.
Mhm.
And so I think, at least for myself, I was getting more of the vitamin A
Mhm.
deficiency than cholesterol itself.
Interesting.
Um,
So you didn't magically ascend after cutting out all the vitamin A? What's
yeah, no, it's no, dude, you feel like shit because you're detoxing.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so about a little like less than a year ago,
Mhm.
um, I I had kind of been experimenting with like another like cut where I was trying to like lose some weight. And then I kind of just started to feel like shit, like all the time. And day in, day out, week in, week out, I just was like not feeling good. And I was like just depressed for an extended period of time.
Mhm.
And it's like I was going through a fair amount of stuff in my personal life, so like I can't
Mhm.
like discount that.
Yeah.
But it just felt like it didn't matter what I ate or what I did, if I ate a lot of carbs or I ate a lot of fat, or if just nothing felt like it was working
Mhm.
until I just had this like inclination to maybe try to get some more vitamin A. And I just like went to the local like health food store and got a vitamin
Interesting.
A supplement and just started taking like 50,000 IU a day. And like
Mhm.
within like a week, I'm just like, oh, I feel fine now.
Interesting.
Um, and so it's interesting because this popularity with the honey diet and the sugar diet has just all of a sudden jumped up right now.
Mhm.
And I've been trying it to some extent over the past like year or two. And outside of like a couple initial like weight losses, I just like I couldn't I couldn't sustain it because I just felt like shit too much.
Mhm.
Whereas when I'm doing it now and I'm taking vitamin A,
Mhm.
I just feel like invincible.
Interesting.
And so I think there's something about the increase of the metabolic rate.
Mhm.
Um, and specifically as it pertains, because if you're doing a low fat diet to cut weight,
Mhm.
that's what you're going to reveal vitamin A and or cholesterol issue.
Right, right, right.
Um, but I think that I'm also sort of seeing. I mean, I'm feel like I'm getting the copper because I am eating quite a bit of shrimp,
Mhm.
but it's like the cravings are like I can go a couple days without it, but then it's like all of a sudden I just go like I need to go to a sushi restaurant and get like all the different seafood that I can.
Right, right.
And so these cravings come on really hard, and it reminds me in a little bit of a different way of when I was on carnivore.
Mhm.
I could not get enough sodium no matter what I did.
Yeah,
Like
common thing.
I literally was weighing and measuring my salt intake
How
to
much were you
make
getting?
sure.
How much were you getting?
I was getting 10 grams of sodium a day.
Yeah, when your carbs are cut that low, you need
Yeah,
it.
or maybe it's 10 grams of salt.
Which
I'm
is
not
still a decent amount of sodium.
okay. Yeah, I honestly I can't remember because I
Mhm.
haven't counted it kind of since then. But no,
Mhm.
maybe it was salt. Probably like 10, 12 grams of salt, and I would weigh it out and like make sure that it got onto all my meat like during
Mhm.
the day. And I
Mhm.
would take Element and put it in my water
Right.
and drink that all day long. And it was you really do there. I feel like there's no better way to understand these things without like experiencing them firsthand.
100%. Yeah, you have to.
Whereas now, where I'm not eating a low carb diet
Mhm.
and I'm eating a lot of sugar, I still crave salt, and but I'm eating far less than I used to.
Mhm.
But all I make sure to do is I take like a little teaspoon or half teaspoon. I don't know. I don't measure it. And I just kind of throw it in my mouth like first thing in the morning.
Yep.
And then I make sure I get like another one of those midday.
Mm-hmm.
And I put an electrolyte mix in my water.
Mm-hmm.
But compared to Element, which is like all sodium and very little potassium,
Right, it's like 5-to-1.
Yeah, the one that I use, Sport Drink, is like a 1-to-1 similar
cool.
ratio of sodium to potassium.
Mm.
And so it seems like on a higher sugar, higher carb diet, your potassium needs go way up and your sodium needs go way down. Does that sound right?
It would actually. And potassium is required to process glucose along with calcium, magnesium, manganese, zinc, selenium, and iodine as well. Like, to give an example of this, at the level of the pancreas uses calcium and magnesium as signaling molecules to signal the release of insulin in response to you consuming dietary carbohydrate. Insulin does its job. It puts sugar into the cells. You don't want blood sugar to get too low. So magnesium is responsible for shutting down that insulin signal in the pancreas. So you're using potassium more frequently. You're putting a higher demand on the calcium and the magnesium in the pancreas. Zinc is used to extend the action of insulin. So you are, in theory, driving up requirements for those elements, but it's sort of like 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, because carnivore does so with different elements. And very low carb diets, you waste sodium because you're not retaining it as much because insulin goes down. And you might end up losing a lot of potassium through that mechanism of low sodium. The body tries to conserve sodium at the expense of potassium because sodium is so important. And you'll end up losing potassium first. That's a big reason for like the keto flu and why people feel dizzy and, brain foggy when they switch over from a carbohydrate-based diet to a more keto-based approach. But, I think Pete has to be given his flowers in terms of like his recommendations for sodium. And I think saying how important sodium was all those years ago when the recommendations in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and even up to this day were lower sodium, which is to me one of the most bonkers public health disasters that has existed outside of like, other crazy recommendations on the dietary front, like avoiding milk and dairy products. But it sort of goes to this notion of sodium being extremely important. I sort of think of sodium as like the master mineral because it helps to keep potassium in the cells and it helps to keep soluble in the blood calcium and magnesium and some of these other elements. So there's sodium is important for what it does, but it also has really powerful effects on these other elements. And, in the mineral balancing paradigm, it's all about balance. You want enough sodium. And really what we're trying to manipulate are the underlying mechanisms that control sodium, like aldosterone. It's the primary adrenal hormone that controls sodium retention in the body. And you want that hormone to work well. You don't want excessive aldosterone. You don't want low aldosterone. Same way that you don't want, in my opinion, excessive cortisol. You don't want really low cortisol either because of cortisol's effects on potassium. So cortisol helps to regulate potassium at the tissue level as well.
Yeah. So you mentioned aldosterone, and anyone familiar with Pete will know that you want to make sure you get enough sodium to keep your aldosterone from getting too high.
Exactly.
Are there other minerals involved with that as well to prevent aldosterone from going out of control?
It's primarily sodium, but yeah, there's a compensatory mechanism that exists. Not just we can talk about aldosterone and sodium, but like when you have low intake of zinc or these other elements, there are absorption molecules at the level of the gut that will be upregulated massively, like the ZIP family of proteins, the zinc importer proteins at the gut level will be upregulated to absorb more zinc from your food, as one example. Aldosterone will be upregulated massively in states of sodium deficiency or sodium insufficiency. But like aldosterone, when it does get elevated chronically, has a really powerful hypertensive effect. It can harden your arteries if it's elevated for long enough. Um, so, but that idea of there being this underlying control network, I think is really important. That might be an interesting segue to talk about the toxic metals, because these absorption pathways, when they do get upregulated for whatever essential element, it actually causes more efficient bioaccumulation of the heavy metals. And there's a really interesting paper in 2013 in Scientific Reports that was looking at autism and these elements in the hair tissue of autistic kids. And they actually identified a particular, I think it's ZIP4 zinc importer protein that gets upregulated in zinc deficiency. Cadmium and lead get sort of accumulate more efficiently because those toxic elements can utilize and hijack these essential element mineral transport mechanisms to get into the body in the first place. So there's another, yes, there are these direct effects that will occur, and having high aldosterone because of low sodium intake will cause a bunch of problems, but it's like on the back end, there's going to be these other issues that present themselves, these second and third order effects, especially with respect to the metals. And that notion or that idea of the interaction between the metals and the minerals is called ionic mimicry. And it's just this idea that the heavy metals and the minerals, the ones that have similar physiochemical characteristics, the metals use these mineral transport mechanisms to get in the body in the first place. They're trafficked by them in the blood. And then once those elements get into the tissues, the heavy metals, they substitute for these minerals on enzyme binding sites and can cause all sorts of problems after that.
So what would you, you know, over the last so many years, chelation therapy has gotten popular. And a lot of people, I think, I've seen tweets from you that you're a little hesitant, it's something you got to be very careful about. I have a friend who, I don't even know what disease he got. I think it involved, I believe that it's important to, sorry, I think you have to avoid using the C word on YouTube for various things.
Gotcha.
I don't know why, but I literally was just listening to a podcast today where someone's like, oh, I got like not that I'm even monetized yet on YouTube, but anyways, my friend, he got his fillings removed, and I guess it like aerosolizes a bunch of mercury when they do that.
It does.
And he got like some kind of, or a number of like massive diseases all at once.
Fuck yeah.
So what would you, because I'm assuming that we all have some level of heavy metal toxicity, whether it be mercury or aluminum or lead. What would you recommend the average person do about something like that?
Number one, it's understanding this interaction, or these elements, the toxic metals and the essential elements oscillate antagonistically in the body. Anything that you can do to improve nutrient density in the diet is going to be massively beneficial. That's the first line defense that I tell people. You have to increase nutrient density in the diet. Along with that, is caloric sufficiency. Everyone's in a caloric deficit now because they're all desperate to lose weight via that CISO model. So eating enough nutrient dense foods. There's a couple other, good tools that you can use. I like the silica rich mineral water, Fiji.
Yeah, I've heard like there's like hippies are really into Fiji water because of the silica. What's the deal with that, so people don't know?
Yeah, so silica and aluminum are antagonistic to each other, and the form of silica in the silica-rich mineral waters like Fiji and Bacillus and Hawaii volcanic, it's more soluble, so you absorb it more readily, and it binds to aluminum in the blood, basically. And the idea with aluminum and most of these metals, actually, in fact, is that there's a steady state equilibrium between the blood and the tissues. And as silica binds to aluminum in the blood, it will then be excreted through the kidneys, and the body will sort of empty out the aluminum pretty slowly, but it will empty out the aluminum, or there's an emptying effect that occurs at the tissue level. Because the body is trying to keep that element in particular in a steady state equilibrium between the blood and the tissues. So there's an emptying mechanism there. That's a really easy thing to do, But aluminum by far is the most important toxic metal of all of the metals. It's more ubiquitous than all of the other ones combined. Some researchers like Chris Exley at Keele University calls the age that we're in the aluminum age for that reason, because of its ubiquity in the environment. And his assertion is that everyone has aluminum toxicity. It's just a matter of to what degree do you have it.
So should everyone just go start drinking Fiji water, or is that as simple as it is? Like there's
Yes, that and he actually sort of did some interesting experiments in his lab where he gave Fiji water to Alzheimer's disease patients and noticed significant clinical improvements in like 25% of the people drinking the Fiji water, doing nothing more than just drinking Fiji water.
Should I go buy shares of Fiji right now?
I'm deep. I've got Fiji coin.
No, but like, it's joking, but also like it's, if something like like you mentioned a couple other brands. I don't think I've heard of those other ones. Does Waikea have silica?
I'm not sure. That app, I don't know if you've seen the Oasis water app.
No.
They've got a pretty good X account. But they will list like contaminants, also the silica content for some of them. That's how I found Hawaii Volcanic. But the idea with the silica water is you want to get above 30 milligrams per liter for there to be a significant enough effect from that silica on aluminum.
Because my college buddy actually owns Waikea.
Oh, interesting.
And if that's,
that's cool.
I'm gonna look it up, and if it's true, I'm gonna text him, and I'm gonna be like, let me invest or something.
Yeah, please send me a message too. I would like to invest as well.
Yeah. Okay. So you're saying that aluminum is the most prevalent heavy metal toxicity, and the best way to handle that is drinking Fiji water and these other silica-rich waters.
Yes, and then improving nutrient density. There's a lot of really interesting research out of like Guam, as an example, where they have really low levels of calcium and magnesium in the soils. And because of acid rain, they've got higher aluminum content. And so in that population, there's like a cluster of diseases that have sort of manifest at the same time, like Parkinsonism, Alzheimer's, and dementia at the same time. The theory in the literature is that it's the low levels of calcium and magnesium in the soil combined with the high aluminum, which leads to more efficient accumulation of that aluminum that's causing that cluster of diseases in that population. So improving calcium magnesium status, silica is the primary antagonist to aluminum, but calcium, magnesium, zinc, and iron, actually, interestingly enough, are all pretty antagonistic to aluminum. One of the theories in the literature behind why women get Alzheimer's disease at a higher rate than men is that men have better iron levels throughout the lifetime, right? And the iron actually does protect against accumulation of aluminum.
That, it's funny how, like, again, everything is just a series of trade-offs, because
it is.
They say that one of the reasons why men die earlier than women is our high iron levels, right?
Right.
Like iron seems to be sort of like no pun intended, like a magnet for various diseases and infection and parasites. And so, but okay, so like, for instance, like in America, like all of our flour is enriched with iron, right?
Right.
And so what is the difference between, heme iron that you would be getting from meat versus, people, and the way I've known this is that, like, it's effectively metal shavings that is in our grains, our fortified grains.
Yeah, I understand that as well to be the case. Non-heme versus heme, the way that I sort of think about that is that heme is just better absorbed. Iron from meat is definitely absorbed with higher bioavailability than the non-heme. But again, a lot of the issues that occur is through processing of the breads and the baked goods and stuff, is that it strips all of the other nutrients from the food that would otherwise balance iron. So it's not just, I think iron fortification is probably a big deal and a problem, but it's actually the processing and the stripping of those foods of their other elements that would actually balance iron. Like manganese is the main mineral antagonist to iron. Zinc also balances iron, and zinc content of those grains especially are much lower than they have been historically.
Okay, so in addition to aluminum, I think one of the things that people are probably most concerned about would be mercury and lead, and I've also been hearing more about nickel, but let's say for myself, because I love seafood so much, what should I be looking out for with mercury, and what would be one of the best things to consume or supplement or any kind of intervention to take to deal with mercury toxicity?
Couple of nutrients in particular. I think selenium is the most antagonistic to mercury. So 100, 200 micrograms per day of extra selenium, if you are eating a lot of seafood, is a good idea.
Isn't seafood already high in selenium though? Like oysters are high in selenium.
They are. But it's a little nebulous as to the exact degree to which like selenium is protecting you from mercury, especially if you have other metals in that fish. Cadmium and arsenic are in the oceans as well. And there's this idea of synergistic toxicity with the metals that is, they call it the cocktail effect of heavy metals. And when you have low levels of metals in a particular thing that you're consuming, they might be under the safe threshold for exposure to an individual element. But the toxicity is synergistic to such a degree that they've noticed sometimes 10 and 100-fold increases in toxicity by combinations of these metals in seafood or other foods, as an example. So it's one of the arguments that Kruse kind of makes, to protect you against mercury toxicity when you're eating like 2 pounds a day of fish, like he would recommend. Selenium is protected to some degree, but you might need a little more if there's other heavy metals in that fish. And there is good evidence, I think, that there's arsenic in a lot of fish and cadmium, especially fish at the lower parts of the ocean. This is kind of a wild fact, but this is like a Jeopardy thing. But cadmium is an essential nutrient for a lot of fungal microorganisms deeper in the ocean. And so through consumption of those fungal microorganisms, lower level fish or fish at the lower depths in the ocean have higher cadmium content than fish that are sort of more towards the surface. But I think with fish in general, a good rule is that you want smaller fish. The longer the fish is in the ocean, the higher it is on the food chain, the more likely it is to accumulate mercury and other metals. So I think smaller fish is a good idea. Selenium will protect you. 100, 200 micrograms is very, very safe. I wouldn't go above 200 micrograms per day without testing of selenium. But then zinc and iodine are also antagonistic to mercury as well.
Okay, so if you're eating sushi and you're getting like seaweed in there, is that going to be enough, or would you need let's say for instance that someone listening to this goes, I really like sushi, and it turns out that if you go out for a normal night to eat sushi, the amount of seaweed that is wrapped around your food might not be enough, but if you were to order like a seaweed salad on the side, it would. Like, do you know, is there enough iodine in seaweed to like make up that like within that meal, or do you need to kind of like supplement iodine in addition to that?
I don't know offhand, but what I would do, if I was consuming sushi consistently, I might take the selenium, take 100 micrograms of selenium with that meal. That would be very protective. And then, I think people go crazy with a lot of these nutrients. There's the orthomolecular people, and then there's people that do mega dosing. I think a lot of people's reactions to nutrients are as a result of like overdoing them. I think people have done that with iodine, and like the Brownstein protocol seems a little insane to me, 50 or 100 milligrams of iodine. But if you want to take like a couple kelp capsules, which have 600 micrograms of iodine per pill, take 1 or 2 of those along with a little selenium, maybe 10 to 20 milligrams of zinc. If you're consistently consuming sushi or other fish, that's a pretty good idea. And you're not going to really run the risk of toxicity or anything else with nutrient intakes of those elements at that threshold.
Is there a form of selenium that you'd recommend?
Selenocysteine. I think is probably one of the better absorbed forms.
Okay. I used to take this one called Seleno Excel. That was the name of the
Mm.
supplement, but I do not recall what
Mm.
the form of selenium in it was.
Yeah, it might be selenomethionine. I'm thinking it might be that one for the Seleno Excel. I can't
Okay.
remember though.
Okay. Um, One of the things that I feel like I've seen you talk about is
Mhm.
how um, minerals sort of drive uh, emotions and personality types.
Mm.
And this is something that I find really interesting because a lot of my interest in nutrition is in manipulating myself as a being, right? And
Same.
I've noticed that when I do different diets and I have different lifestyles, kind of become different versions of myself, like I'm a different
Right.
person
Mm.
at different times. And sometimes it's just like I'm just like crushing the game. And I'm like, I like that version of myself. How do I be more of that version? And sometimes
Right.
I just suck. And I'm like,
Mhm.
why am I sucking right now? What am I doing? What is going
I don't know
on?
anything about that at all. I don't know anything about sucking.
I've never sucked, man. I'm just like,
Never.
I
Always
just
on.
nothing but net every time.
Yeah.
Um, and so again, like because I've kind of been like recently more like obsessed with copper,
Mm.
I came across this post on um well, I had saved this and I was looking for something, you know, like how on your phone you
Mhm.
can search your pictures and if it sees the words, it'll pull it up.
Yep.
I guess I had screenshotted this sometime in the past, a couple years ago,
Mm.
but there was a post on the Ray Peat forum,
Mhm.
which no longer exists. Now it's one of the, because the vitamin A people,
Rest in peace.
yeah, because it was run by like one of the crazy vitamin A people and like they changed the whole thing.
Oh yeah.
Um, but anyways, so, you know, it's good to screenshot stuff. You never know when stuff's going to come down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't even remember what I was looking for, but somehow I came across this post on the forum where this guy was talking about how doing a super peaty diet, like the orange juice and milk diet,
Mhm.
and what I think is happening with a lot of people on this sugar diet thing now and the honey
Mhm.
diet is like you have this like sudden burst of like childlike energy and wonder and joy.
Mhm.
And so there's all this energy to like do this and try that and experiment and all this kind of thing.
Mhm.
But the diet that, you know, what I think a lot of people are doing with that, increasing the metabolic rate. And
Mhm.
this is why I mentioned I sort of kind of gave myself confirmation that I thought I was depleting copper,
Mhm.
is that copper is necessary for this like completion essence, like
Mhm.
in the sense that if you were deficient in copper and had a really high metabolic rate, you would like try a bunch of things and you would start a
Mhm.
bunch of things, but you wouldn't finish anything.
Mhm.
And so I'd love if you could describe some of these various emotion states or personality types that come with, you know, various minerals, maybe signs of heavy metal toxicity, and whether or not that if you that copper idea specifically resonates kind of with what your experience has been.
I mean, absolutely. Sort of. This comes from Dr. Lawrence Wilson. That was the first place that I ever read this, and the idea is that there's an anthropomorphic quality of the minerals and metals. And so, like, to sort of talk about copper, copper is used in the wiring in our homes because it's a very good conductor of electricity. And so, copper has all of these elements have specific properties that make them what they are. Copper is a really good conductor of electricity. It's malleable. It's a softer metal, so women have higher copper levels, and in some ways, a woman's feminine essence is determined by her copper status because those properties of copper are imbued or given to the person that has higher copper levels. That's true for all of these elements. Like iron is a really durable, hard, rigid metal. It's used in steel manufacturing, as an example. And a good way to think about like the anthropomorphic qualities of these elements is to look at them through the lens of like metallurgy and what they're used for in industry. Like iron is used in steel manufacturing because of those properties that it has: durability, rigidness, strength. Men have higher iron levels. Men are harder, stronger, more durable. They can withstand the slings and arrows of the world because of their higher iron levels. Zinc, as another example here, is a very strong but flexible element. It's kind of like the middle ground between copper, which is really feminizing, and iron, which is really masculinizing. And so zinc is like a very strong element, but it's also flexible. And it gives those mental qualities to a person. So zinc can make a person really strong, a little more analytical underneath, but also quite flexible. So all of these elements have specific qualities. And if you have more of one element versus another, you will psychologically lean more one way than another. And I sort of think of this as like, it's a probabilistic sort of thing. It's not deterministic. It's not to say you're going to act this way if you have copper toxicity, or you're going to be this way if you have iron toxicity. You still have free will, but there's a propensity more towards rigidness, strength, and those sorts of qualities in a higher iron person versus a higher copper person, who would be more malleable, more receptive. Women are more receptive. And they're very good conductors of electricity. They're very good with social situations, a lot better than men, right? So it's sort of like this anthropomorphic quality of these elements. And like cadmium as an example of a toxic element, really hard. It's used to plate steel. It's very anti-corrosive. It can, when it gets into your body, cadmium can harden your arteries. It can harden your kidneys. It can also harden your personality. And those guys that we know of, smoking 2 packs a day of Reds, inhaling cadmium for their entire life, that's sort of like, outlaw biker dude who's smoking 2 packs a day of Reds. A lot of that is coming from the influence of cadmium on the mind.
So if you want to be a badass, smoke Marlboro Reds.
Smoke more cigarettes. Smoke more cigs. Yeah, exactly.
And so like, I'm assuming that different types of cigarettes, for example, have different levels of metals. Mm-hmm. And so like, it's so interesting because all these different things have like a certain vibe to them, right? Like this cigarette has a different vibe. Like, there's the kind of person who smokes Marlboro Reds. There's the kind of person who smokes American Spirits. Yeah. There's the kind of person who smokes Parliaments,
right.
And so it's always like interesting to see where these kind of things line up. Mm-hmm. And so, it makes you wonder, like, this is happening across the board all the time, and we're so completely unaware of it.
Yeah.
You mentioned the iron thing. It made me think about like carnivore people.
Yeah. 100%.
And carnivore people it seems like over time can get like very like kind of hard-headed and
super rigid.
And they kind of like can act very like angry when you get in arguments with them.
100%.
And I find it's interesting to me because these days, like, I don't really crave red meat at all. I probably eat it once, somewhere between 0 to 2 times a week. These, again, because like I'm also specifically like just really trying to like aggressively play with this diet to see for weight loss, and it's just like there's a lot of fat in red meat. So it's interesting that I'm craving so much seafood, and maybe I'm craving a lot of copper.
Right.
But I also, again, like you can't really think about any of this stuff with like in a vacuum. Like I came to this from, I ate a lot of red meat my entire life. Yep. My mom is Persian, and so I grew up eating tons of lamb.
Oh yeah.
And I just sort of like was always a big meat eater. And in college, I got into paleo, and I was eating a lot of red meat. And all through my 20s, I was eating a lot of red meat. And then in 2020, I did carnivore, and I was eating a lot of red meat.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering, like maybe it's like my body just has so much iron stored up that like I just don't. It's just not a problem. But it's something that like, and that's why I'm really interested in this personality thing. One, just because like it's esoteric and like that stuff intrigues me.
Yeah.
But two, I'm trying to think of like how people, without getting tests done, can sort of like think about and whether you want to call it a symptom or whether you want to call it like a personality type or something to look for that might help them figure out what they have too much of or not enough of, or what they can manipulate to make themselves more into the person that they want to be.
I mean, just think about like the sort of dichotomy or the difference between like vegans and carnivore people. Vegans and vegetarians are kind of like flowy. They're more coppery. They're not getting any zinc to balance all the copper in their foods, and they're kind of like anemic, directionless. That's another really strong property of iron is directionality, focus, being able to go in one direction and kind of know where you're going and say fuck off to everything else or everyone else. That's sort of, saying things to you. So the vegans are kind of like more coppery based, vegetarians as well. The meat eaters more iron based. I think it's sort of interesting that you're, relating back your childhood and like your 20s where you were eating a lot of meat, this more recent time for you, it might be sort of like an unconscious, what's the word? But you're sort of gravitating more away from meat as a way to balance yourself. And sort of that craving is an expression of the body's attempt to balance and get more copper based foods to balance out all the iron that you have stored. That's a really common thing, especially when we like measure the oxidation rate on a hair tissue mineral analysis test. Fast oxidizers do really well on fat. They don't do well on carbohydrates because carbohydrates speed up the oxidation rate, right? We know that from being in the peat space, but fat slows down the oxidation rate. And a lot of times people that gravitate towards higher fat diets might already have a fast oxidation or metabolic rate. And that craving is the body's attempt or an expression of balance, trying to balance oneself. So, I mean, for iron, like for people that have iron toxicity, and I put myself in that category actually, a lot of men have a much bigger problem with iron than women do. And women have a bigger problem with copper toxicity just because they start out with higher levels of copper in the first place. But if you're kind of like angry, like getting into arguments online, and I've done this myself plenty of times, so I'm not excluding myself from that. But if you're kind of like angry underneath and just like really a little more stubborn, hard-headed, have a really strong sense of direction, the elements that balance out iron more so are zinc and copper. So you want to sort of try and actually calcium as well. So a lot of times people who love dairy, myself included, that's a way for them to express balance in some ways because calcium and iron are antagonistic to each other. So what's also kind of interesting with the cigarette thing, there's another really interesting aspect to that. A lot of times people who are very copper toxic are really sensitive people. They're in their head, they're overthinkers, all of those characteristics that we know as more feminine are a direct result of that copper toxicity. For people that have extreme levels of copper toxicity, are really sensitive, they can't take any criticism, they have problems in the world, operating in the world, they might actually gravitate towards cigarettes because of the high cadmium content, and the cadmium helps to harden them up a little bit. And so I've known people in my life who I can kind of tell at times they're like very sensitive people underneath. They don't really do well at jobs, people telling them what to do. They're much more introverted. It tends to be women more often, but a lot of these women either gravitate towards marijuana or cigarettes as a way to get more cadmium to balance out. That's obviously a pathological way to do that. And it's unconscious. It's happening unconsciously. It's not happening at the level of, I know what I'm doing. I'm giving myself cadmium toxicity. But the cadmium in some ways balances out the softness and the malleability of copper.
That's interesting. Yeah, I feel like there's something to, like what you're saying, what people are being drawn to.
Yeah.
And since you brought up cigarettes, it's like I smoked like socially, like rarely, like very rarely in high school, like just at some parties, and then a little bit more in college. But like, it was very rare for me to buy a pack. I would just like smoke at bars and parties. Yeah. And then I just stopped smoking after college because I was like done with that.
Yeah.
And I don't think I smoked like a single cigarette until like a few years ago. And so this is post carnivore, post primal diet, which is ton of meat, ton of organs, ton of raw milk, ton of eggs. And it was when I was working on the farm.
Mm.
And it was like right after my son was born too. So I was
Mm.
very stressed.
Mm.
Um, but it was like, it's funny. I don't really remember like what consciously led me to do it.
Mm.
But it was just like, I feel like I need to start smoking for my health. Like that was like
Right.
the sense of
Interesting.
feeling that I got.
Yeah, yeah.
And you know, depending on who's listening to this, they will think I'm absolutely batshit crazy for even suggesting such a thing.
Mhm.
And other people would be like, that totally makes sense. If you
Right.
understand the way that your body sort of like self-medicates,
Right.
you can absolutely recognize that there is a therapeutic effect to these things. Um,
100%. And
and
especially with this balance idea, you know, um, that's another thing that I feel like people are. I mean, it's a very esoteric concept, so it's not that people don't know; it's just not out there. But that expression of wanting to balance oneself, like nicotine might, in theory, raise sodium and potassium levels, and if you're
hmm,
going through a really low, sort of depressive period or burnout type of period, that might help with that.
yeah, that is interesting. And then, you know, I've noticed like when I would go like in waves when I like
Mhm.
smoke more, I wouldn't smoke at all for a couple months.
Mhm.
Um, and but what's interesting is since I've been doing this sugar diet thing, I like just totally forgot that like nicotine existed.
Oh, interesting.
Like I haven't touched a Zyn, I haven't touched a cigarette. And again, like I mean, you know, I never really thought of myself as like I was not like an addictive smoker. It was like
Yeah.
I could just like smoke with friends or whatever, and then I just leave it and then come back and leave it.
Mhm.
And so it's not like something like I don't care. Like, you know, I'm about to go out of town for a weekend and I'll like go smoke some cigarettes or something
Mhm.
because, you know, I don't think there's anything terrible about smoking a couple like
Yeah.
once a month or anything like that.
Yeah.
Um, but it's so, it was funny when I realized like I totally forgot that like tobacco was a thing. I just like forgot about it.
Interesting.
And I wonder similarly if there's something with caffeine, either
Mm.
coffee specifically, or you know, I'm a big fan of Coca-Cola.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
um, as I've been eating this specific way,
Mhm.
I also like I'll have a Coke every once in a while, but like
Mhm.
I kind of like forget about them.
Mm.
Um, and I wonder what it is about whatever it is I'm specifically doing that either I no longer have any sort of hankering for caffeine,
Mhm.
um, or
Interesting.
or maybe there's other elements in both coffee and Coke which could be there. Whereas like on other diets, I just felt like I wanted them a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of interesting. Like, the sugar from the honey would, in theory, increase, glucocorticoid production. And that's what sort of soda or Cokes would do as well. So maybe you're just satisfying that, and or it's gotten to a point where it's creating balance, and there's enough like cellular expression of cortisol or the other glucocorticoids, and you go, I'm good. I don't need any more. I don't need to stimulate that pathway anymore.
Yeah, I mean, you know, again, people look at me like I'm crazy when I say
Mm-hmm.
that like Coca-Cola is medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And I was medicating myself with it, and then I tried this Coke diet thing where I was drinking like 10 Cokes a day.
How long did you do that for?
I did it for like 3 weeks. I did it, yeah, three, maybe a little bit longer than that. I did it like
Interesting.
really consistently for like 3 weeks, and then I kind of like, you know, maybe did it a little bit less. But I was
Mhm.
drinking like, you know, 8 to 10 Cokes a day for like 3 weeks straight,
Interesting.
and I lost a bunch of weight.
Interesting.
Um,
Yeah, I saw some of those posts. I was like, wow, that's pretty crazy.
yeah, and you know, again, I love Coke still, and I
Mhm.
like I think it's fine to drink. I mean,
Mhm.
there could be negative effects of the fact that if you're drinking an aluminum can, if
Mhm.
there's any sort of concern about the, you know, the water quality, but
Yeah.
like when you can feel that a substance is
Mhm.
helping you and medicating you, like you're very aware of it, you know,
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
and there's a difference between someone who like is abusing some sort of drug kind of a thing. And again,
Right.
I also like I have an addictive personality, but I've never been addicted to like a substance
Hmm.
in the sense that I've been able to like drop something like that,
Pretty quickly.
and I never had to like
Hmm.
force myself. I was just like, I'm over it. And
Hmm.
so like I started like partying and drinking when I was in high school, and
Same.
yeah. And then it was just like after college, I was, you know, maybe a couple years after, and I was just like, I'm over it. And then it's like I would drink like once or twice a month, and then it became like once every few months, once every 6 months.
Right.
And so it wasn't like, oh man, I have a problem, I need to stop. I just like I drank a shit
Right.
ton, and then I just stopped when I felt like it.
Yeah.
And in college, I smoked a bunch of weed, and then I just like stopped. And I've been gone periods where
Mm.
I just leave coffee for a year,
Interesting.
and or tobacco or any of these things that people deem like bad. I think they'll have medicinal properties, but for me, like I don't understand the concept of like addiction. I just sort of understand it as like the body has needs and cravings, and then
Yeah.
it just like goes away
Mhm.
when it's not needed anymore.
It's sort of interesting. I would love to see your hair test, because what you're describing to me sounds like someone that is in what I would call balanced oxidation. Yes, they're using substances for a period of time. Where I see people get addicted to things and they can't stop is when those substances are sort of superficially balancing their metabolic rate in some ways, and they're relying on the substance to keep them balanced versus underlying biochemical processes, mineral sufficiency, lack of toxic metals, good thyroid hormone health, keeping you balanced. And so I think I see that a lot more often, and this is more rare because so many people are ill and sick nowadays, but like balanced oxidation, flexible metabolic rate, it sounds like you're sort of in that category of someone, yeah, you can use stuff when you feel like you want it, but you're not physiologically dependent on it. And it sounds like you're really not self-medicating. That's the thing with addiction that I think I see more than anything else is people are using substances to sort of balance themselves because they're not balanced at rest.
Yeah, that's I mean that's like what you'd have to think that like is going on with everybody is everyone has a
Mm-hmm.
different sort of chemical situation.
100%.
And I've noticed this with just like my food cravings.
Mm-hmm.
Like I kind of say like I'm always going in like various seasons where
Mm-hmm.
um there'd be times where I feel like I can't get enough of red meat, and then there are times
Yeah.
when I just like don't eat it at all.
Mm-hmm.
And it really like there's a very specific um this is probably one of the most notable kind of cycles that I have is like my red meat and then like my fish and seafood, and my red meat and my
Mm-hmm.
fish and seafood. And I kind of like go in and out of these things, and sometimes it's over a span of weeks,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's over more of a span of months, or even like on the year like scale.
Mm-hmm.
um and that's why I, I recognize that not everyone has the self-awareness to do this stuff. And so
Right.
whenever I give anyone health advice,
Mm-hmm.
I'm always trying to get them to a place where they can like be self-sufficient.
100%.
Because it's the only way that like how do you give someone advice if the advice is saying judge your cravings to determine what food you need to eat? And they're like, dude, I eat Cheetos. Like I don't know.
I crave Cheetos,
Yeah.
bro.
Yeah, you're like, what how do you translate that
Mm-hmm.
over to somebody else? And that's why one of the things that I think about in terms of like I said, I like the idea of sort of how can I turn myself into this kind of person.
Yeah.
You have like some level of free will, and then you kind of have something that your body is just sort of doing,
Right.
right? And so it's very easy to just like purposefully say, I'm going to eat this food,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm going to take this supplement.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you do that, that food or supplement can just like make you into a kind of person who does X behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, which, people will of course tell you very, very obviously if they've ever taken various drugs, whether they be
Right.
antidepressants, whether they be Adderall, whether they be steroids, like
Mm-hmm.
your whole personality type
Changes.
changes.
Mm-hmm.
But a pill, if you even reduce it down from like food and put it into something that's a medicine, a pill or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
where there's no like food craving involved, you can take a pill of any kind that can drive you to be a certain way.
Right. Right.
And so I'm always trying to identify, of course I want everything to be able to be done by nutrition,
Mm-hmm.
but like I've also like forced myself to eat things because I think it's healthy for me. And
Mm-hmm.
usually for me, it's not hard to force myself to eat something if I do believe it's healthy.
Right. Same.
Like I can convince myself that anything tastes good. Um,
Right.
you know, because I'm just like I'm willing to go through that to get the results.
Yeah,
Um,
same.
and so because of this mineral personality type
Mhm.
kind of factor, so people can, I don't know how much time you have left, um,
Like
but
15 or so minutes.
perfect.
Yeah.
So, if we can maybe kind of start wrapping this up to
Mhm.
give people like most actionable steps that they can take walking away from this.
Yeah.
Um, what would you, whether it be, general food recommendations, general supplement recommendations, of course, feel free to shill any, your
I
coaching
will.
or
I
or
will.
mineral
100%.
test, all
Yeah.
of it. Just what would you recommend someone do after they've listened to this to try to get their minerals back in check?
First and most important thing I would say is eat. You need to be eating. The whole idea of fasting to me is a little crazy in the modern context. So, eating number one consistently, upping the nutrient density of your diet is probably number two. Ways to do that, I think, are sort of tried and true. Lots of good quality dairy. That to me is one of the single easiest things that people can do. Dairy is really convenient. It tastes good. And it's super nutrient dense. Lots of potassium, lots of calcium, fat soluble vitamins. I'm sure. I think you've talked to Chris Masterjohn. I'm sure you guys talked about that.
Really,
But
really quick, that
yeah.
there are so many different kinds of dairy.
Mhm.
And one thing I've noticed is, like, depending on the form of dairy you're consuming,
Mhm.
some of the nutrients are totally different.
True.
So are there certain forms of dairy that you recommend, or do you think, um, or people should focus on, or is just
Mhm.
getting a variety fine? Like, because whether there's fresh milk, and then there's a difference in nutrients between regular milk and raw
True.
milk. Whether it's
Lactoferrin. Yeah.
different forms of cheeses, different forms of yogurts or cottage cheese or butter,
Yeah.
sour cream. Like, feel free to give as much specifics as you'd like there.
I think generally you want to do kind of a variety of dairy. So obviously, like eating yogurt, you'll get certain probiotic strains in there that you might not get from other types of dairy. But raw milk, I think, is probably at the top. You're getting lactoferrin in there. It's more nutrient dense. I think raw goat dairy for me is probably the best
Yes.
that you can get. Yeah,
Yes.
I know, right?
Yes.
And you're in California, right?
Yeah, I can get it from the store 5 minutes away. It's
Yeah, I'm
amazing.
in Idaho. We have like 10 farms around here that produces like raw goat milk and raw
Amazing.
goat. Yeah, it's unreal. So raw goat dairy, I think, is goat dairy in general is more nutrient dense than cow dairy. So not that cow dairy is bad. Everyone's gonna sort of maybe jump on that, but goat dairy, raw goat milk, raw goat yogurt, really good. And then the cheese is like, Jarlsberg cheese has, I think, the highest K2 content of all of the different cheeses. That's on Master John's sort of database there. So I like to eat.
Is that a brand, or is that a certain type of cheese?
It's a type of cheese from
Okay.
Denmark. Yeah,
Jarlsberg.
Jarlsberg is the
So with a
highest.
J.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So highest K2 content of all of the cheeses is in Jarlsberg cheese. So
Amazing.
I like to eat that quite a bit. But I think a variety. If you can't get raw milk, it's not the end of the world. Just consume cow dairy that's pastured or as best as you can get.
Well, when I'm traveling and I can't get raw goat milk,
Mhm.
the Summerhill brand of goat milk is fantastic.
Agreed.
It tastes really good, and I know at least that it's available in Colorado and Arizona.
Have you had the
Um,
Meyenberg brand of the goat milk?
yeah, I don't like it.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
and well, one of the problems is even the normal, I mean, the full fat version, I
Mhm.
believe. I could be wrong.
Mhm.
I think the full fat version has a vitamin fortification,
Oh, interesting.
but even if it doesn't, I know that I've tried it, and I don't think I felt too great from it.
And the separation was a little weird when I've tried it of the fat with the actual liquid. Although I don't know, there's something about the taste of the Meyenberg that I just really like. I don't know what it
Hmm.
is.
Well, you
Um,
look. I mean, again, it's nothing. There's no perfect option here,
yeah,
and so Meyenberg is pretty widely.
Mhm.
If your store sells goat milk, it
Exactly,
sells Meyenberg.
exactly.
So yeah, for people who want to get some dairy and you can try it, see how you feel.
Yeah, yeah, but just for general recommendations, like most people need more calcium. They need more potassium, especially. And dairy is just a simple, super easy way to get that in.
Yeah,
Really nutrient dense.
because milk is high in potassium.
Yep.
Yeah, a lot of people
Very, very
don't
high.
realize that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it is sort of balanced out with the calcium in there. But, especially for the metals that we're exposed to now, lead, cadmium, and aluminum, calcium is directly antagonistic to all of those elements. So that's another thing I think that hopefully in the future, there's going to be sort of a synthesis of nutritional sciences and metals toxicology. They're separate fields now, but I sort of think of them as one field because of the way that those elements oscillate with each other antagonistically. And all of the most interesting aspects of like metals toxicology revolves around like their ability to affect the essential elements and disturb all of the functions that those essential elements are responsible for. But to bring it back to the recommendations, enough calories. Number one, don't fast. Totally delusional in my opinion. Lots of dairy, good quality meats. Also, I think really important. I think you'll be more protected from iron toxicity if you're consistently pairing it with dairy. So I think there's less concern over iron toxicity if you are consuming a lot of dairy. Carnivores obviously get in trouble because they're only consuming red muscle meat, usually. And there's very little dairy in there to sort of balance that out. But then I also like to recommend a lot of cooked vegetables. Kind of interesting that it sounds like Pete was kind of on this train as well. Maybe not as much, but we recommend a ton of cooked veggies for our clients. Not only because of the nutrient density, the veggies are a really good source, broadly speaking, of magnesium, potassium as well, which is hard to come by in the modern diets, but really good source of soluble fiber. The soluble fiber helps to bind toxic metals in the gut, especially when you're on a mineral balancing program. That can be really important as we antagonize metals in the system. So I recommend lots of cooked veggies, lots of good quality dairy, good quality meats, some seafood, like sardines, I think are pretty safe. And then, I make recommendations for tweaking the macronutrient ratios based on a person's oxidation or metabolic rate. Some people need higher fat. Some people need more carbohydrates. I'm sort of agnostic on that question, but for the majority of people, I think they tend towards slower oxidation, slower metabolism. Carbohydrates are actually a pretty good idea for those people. But then also I would say two other recommendations that you could implement tomorrow if you wanted to: Fiji water or the high silica water to antagonize aluminum. And then a detoxification modality that I think, sort of cuts across space and time and different types is sauna. I think sauna is...
I love the sauna.
I'm in my near-infrared sauna almost every day, like 40, 50 minutes.
Wow.
So sauna is, I think, by far, in that particular type of sauna, the near-infrared is probably the most powerful way to enhance detoxification and elimination of metals.
Sweet. For sauna, various people will recommend that you should consume certain things around the sauna.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are just say like make sure that you have electrolytes with you.
Mm-hmm.
Of course it makes sense because like you're sweating and depleting yourself, but are you gonna have a better time detoxing if you're taking electrolytes with like along with your sauna?
Yeah, you need to make sure, and that's one thing I coach all my clients on is you will lose electrolytes through the sweat mechanism, and so you need to replace that. I think the sweat mechanism will slow down actually if you're depleted of like sodium as an example, and you could overheat in the sauna if you don't have enough electrolytes on board. So I think taking an electrolyte mix before, maybe like a teaspoon of salt, you could do that with a little coconut water.
For the potassium.
For the potassium, exactly.
I'm gonna shill Sport Drink because I have
Nice.
the affiliate. So
Nice.
Go get Sport Drink and use my code Rainer and get yourself a discount. This is my little water bottle.
Oh, nice.
And I put Sport Drink in this every time I go to the gym.
Oh, sweet.
And my gym has a sauna, and so I usually hit the sauna afterwards.
Nice.
And I feel way better when I drink it while I'm in there.
Yeah.
What about like I think some people recommend like taking activated charcoal when you sauna. Is that necessary or
I think that's a little more nebulous. Is it having a big effect? it might have a sort of chelating-like effect. I just don't really think it's one of those things that's going to move the needle too much one way or the other.
Because we'll wrap this up here, but I actually did like a mercury chelation therapy
Oh,
a number of
interesting.
like 7 years ago,
Interesting.
and because I had been eating a bunch of like raw fish,
Mm.
and I still eat raw fish. So I don't know if I was just a total waste if I was gonna go back to eating raw fish, but I kind of just had this like inclination that I might have a toxicity, and so I went to get my levels checked, and I did.
Yeah. What test did you do?
I don't remember what it was called.
Mm.
I went to a functional medicine doctor. I got all kinds of blood, urine, stool tests. I spent thousands and thousands of dollars and all this and things. And I mean, like, I really,
Right.
I wish I could have all that money back. But
Yeah.
but I did the chelation therapy, and so
do you remember what they gave you?
If you said if you said some of the options, I could remember it. I think it was like an acronym.
DMSA or DMSO?
No.
EDTA?
No. Is there a G in there?
BAL, ball? British anti-Lewisite, that would be another common one. I'm trying to think of any other specific mercury chelators. NAC, maybe?
No. Because the thing is, like, I'm familiar with DMSO now.
Yeah.
But I wasn't then, and it doesn't sound right. I could have sworn it was like a 4-letter acronym thing. Yeah. But anyways, like there was an IV and everything, and they would do it, and I did it, a certain number of times over a span of weeks, and like the last time I did it, it like wrecked me.
Yeah.
So one of the things that they talked about was that like you may or may not feel shitty after doing it.
Yeah.
And the first number of times I did it, I was like, fine, and I went about my day and whatever. And on that one, it was like I had to like basically like kind of like I didn't really pass out, but like I basically had to just lay there for like an extra hour.
Interesting.
And so one of the things that I'm I don't know about concerned about, one of the things I think is important to think about is that when you're doing anything that like resembles detoxification, you have to do something to protect your body while you're doing it. And that's why I brought up the charcoal. I wasn't sure if there's something you need to be sure to do when if you let's say you sauna very regularly, and you're really trying to speed up this detoxification process. Do you need to protect yourself in some way if you are kind of really getting out a bunch of gunk?
Mobilizing stuff. I think the primary way to sort of deal with that or mitigate that, if you are nutrient sufficient, if you're getting a lot of different nutrients in the diet that are sort of at the foundation of the antioxidant enzyme pathways, metallothionein is famously zinc dependent. If you're getting nutrients, that is a valid consideration. It's a valid thing to think about. I think just slowing down on the sauna, if you start to get hit too hard, making sure your electrolyte status is good, lots of potassium, lots of sodium in the diet. The thing about mineral balancing, and I'll show my thing here, is that we're sort of upregulating your body's own detoxification pathways. And that's the primary mechanism that it's detoxifying metals in the first place. Why it's a lot safer and more effective is because your body is sort of deciding at what time and what metal to remove from what tissue. It's a much safer way to do detoxification than chelation, as an example. And other considerations notwithstanding, like chelation, a lot of the chelators are not substrate specific. So something you might take to chelate out lead, like EDTA, you're going to chelate out calcium as well. It's part of why they add calcium to that preparation now. But other of these chelating agents, you're going to chelate out other divalent metals like zinc or copper or iron. So if the metals are in there in the first place because of nutrient deficits or subclinical deficiencies, you could potentially make those worse when you do chelation rounds. Also, a lot of chelators don't readily cross cell membranes. So you might, and this is where the use case of chelation, I think, is valid. If you have an acute exposure or a lot of a metal circulating in blood, because of an acute or recent exposure, that's where chelators, I think, are useful. But if we're talking about chronic subclinical metal toxicity, where metals are primarily stored in organs and bone and liver and kidneys and your brain, a lot of chelators won't even cross those barriers, the cell membrane. So you might be chelating out minerals in your blood while not even touching metals where they're actively doing damage in the tissues.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, last thing, and I'll let you go.
Yeah.
Because so many people are focused on losing weight these days, and I know at least on YouTube, I picked up a lot of followers from this sugar diet thing, and so a lot of people are aggressively trying to lose weight. Both for the people who are maybe significantly overweight right now, and I know that like body fat is a place where your body sort of holds toxins. What is something to look out for people who are going to be losing 50, 60, 100, 200 pounds, as far as potentially liberating toxin into the body, as well as if someone is eating this diet, which is basically pure fruit and sugar all day long with occasional lean meat sources, what are things that you would recommend they really be sure to include to shore up their mineral bases?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would actually include, if you could, cooked vegetables where you can, as sort of like a binder and enough soluble fiber to help bind things that are liberated from the fat tissue.
Okay, so like with your lean meat at night, just make sure you give yourself a portion of cooked greens and just a variety of vegetables is fine. Like just get a nice diversity, or any specifics.
Yeah, a good diversity: onions, rutabagas, like broccoli, the cruciferous veggies, cauliflower. Most of them have enough soluble fiber to get the job done, but that would be the main thing that I would include. If they are, losing a ton of weight pretty quickly, some of the metals are lipophilic. Mercury, probably the most famous example there, and others can be stored in fat. So it will have to sort of be processed through the liver and gallbladder. So I think keeping that on board, soluble fiber, enough veggies, will help to mitigate some of that.
Okay. And for just like an all around mineral base for someone doing this kind of diet?
The veggies are actually really, really good source of minerals, but I would include dairy where you can as well, just for the potassium, for the calcium as well, and the fat solubles.
And you think shellfish would be good too, or you're not as big on that?
I'm not as big on shellfish, but I do like most forms of protein, chicken, turkey. You need complete forms of the amino acid groups to actually make like metal binding proteins, like which are cysteine based or sulfur based.
Cool. Well, Clark, thank you so much for being here.
Wow.
If you want to tell people where they can find you online and what the name of your, because you run like a testing and coaching company, is that right?
Yeah, it's called Nutritional Analytics, and on Instagram it's just all lowercase nutritional_analytics. On X it's Metals Bra at Metals Bra, and then we've got a website as well. You can. On Instagram, though, that's sort of the primary hub where a lot of things get done. Like if you want to set up a discovery call and understand mineral balancing a little more deeply and see if you want to embark on a mineral balancing program and work with me directly, you can set up a discovery call on the link on Instagram. Those are the three places: nutritionalanalytics.com, Metals Bra on X, and nutritional_analytics on Insta.
All right. Clark, thank you so much, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Josh.
All right. See you, everybody.